This week on Houston Newsmakers, and down the stretch they come. It's the final few weeks of the election season. What's the truth about the importance of the after Labor Day stretch run? And knowing what we know now, which candidate has the best chance to pull out the win? Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump are pulling no punches, and neither will our political experts. And the Fort Bend Regional Council on Substance Abuse, the challenges and the solutions on this week's Houston Newsmakers.
From KPRC Channel 2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
I communicated about classified material on a wholly separate system. I took it very seriously. We are not putting ground troops into Iraq ever again, and we're not putting ground troops into Syria.
Generals have been reduced to rubble. They have been reduced to a point where it's embarrassing for our country.
I will not let the VA be privatized.
I never said take the VA, take it, the Veterans Administration private. I wouldn't do that.
But what have you done in your life that prepares you to send men and women of the United States into harm's way?
Well, I think the main thing is I have great judgment. I have good judgment. I know what's going on. I've called so many of the shots.
Now, billed as the Commander-in-Chief Forum, that was Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump facing an audience of military veterans and service members talking national security, military affairs, and veterans issues. It's just one example of the differences and options facing voters in November. Joining me this morning to talk about what's going on and what we might expect in the next few weeks, Dr. Mark Jones, fellow in political science at the Baker Institute at Rice University, and Gary Pollitt, former chair of the Harris County Republican Party, editor of the Texas Conservative Review. Thank you both for being here this morning. So you heard some of what was going on in the Commanders Forum. Anything stick out about that forum that you saw from your analytical position? And I got you both here for different reasons. You're an academic. You analyze things, you look at it. You're just far right. That's what you're interested into.
Not so fast.
Well, okay. Well, we'll talk about all of that. What was your analysis of the Commander-in-Chief Forum?
Well, I think both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are trying to project their messages. Hillary Clinton has a very finely honed message. It's not all that convincing on some points, but I think her goal is to stick to it and not make any errors, and hope that Donald Trump on the other side commits some sort of misstep between now and November 9th or November 8th that continues to keep him down. Do you think anybody's opinion might have been changed by anything you saw during that forum?
No, I think, Cambrell, what these opportunities do for Trump is if he appears to be essentially her equal in terms of stature, then people could conceive of him as president. It's just like this is a follow-up for his visit with the president of Mexico, Nieto, where he looked very presidential. So it'll be now, the next step probably be the debate, the first debate. Will Trump look presidential next to Mrs. Clinton? If he does, well, remember what they've made this race about. Hillary Clinton has said that Donald Trump really isn't capable of being president of the United States. If the American people believe that he is, then this race will go down to the wire.
Dr. Jones, you've analyzed this, you've done a lot of elections. We've heard so much about it really only matters after Labor Day. Maybe it not only matters, but there's so much focus on what happens after Labor Day. Is that true, and how important is it in this case?
Well, this campaign got off a little earlier than past ones. The conventions were earlier, and we knew who both candidates were going to be well into the spring. So it's been going on for a while, but this is the final home stretch, and so we're going to be seeing the candidates really focus in on their messages. And Hillary Clinton's been trying to engage in something like a delay game, sort of killing the clock as she approaches November 8th, but it doesn't appear that that strategy is going to be successful and that she's going to have to reboot her campaign, because she thought that after Donald Trump's pretty disastrous convention, she could just coast to November 8th. But what's clear is that she's going to actually continue to have to fight for votes and address many of the continuing drips and drabs of scandal that are coming out, either related to the Clinton Foundation or related to her email server.
I want to get your comment on that, Gary, in just a second. But first of all, let's look at the polls. I mean, the polls really kind of tell the story. One of the most recent ones, the NBC Survey Monkey poll, showed that Clinton, by the way, just Survey Monkey. It's just tough to say that sometimes. But anyway, it showed that Clinton had a 6-point head-to-head lead, 48-42. That was one of the polls. But then the CNN poll, which really raised a lot of eyebrows, showed that Trump had a lead, 45-43, which basically is a dead heat, really, in terms of the margin of error. What do you read into that, Gary?
Well, SurveyMonkey is an internet poll, okay? So, and it was taken over a number of weeks, so its reliability is essentially zero. The CNN poll is a snapshot, but the question behind these polls you got to ask Gambrell is what is the nature and mixture of what they figure the turnout model to be? Who's going to vote? And the surveyors make estimates. Now, if they're wrong, their polls are going to be wrong. So I would say my take of the race at this point is essentially either person could win. I think that Mark is absolutely correct that the Clinton plan was to let the air out of the ball, four corners offense, remember when we were younger in basketball, and slide to the election. But you can't do that now. Now they're hoping that Trump does some other things, that say some things that are considered inappropriate, stupid, that get people thinking, oh, no, I don't think I can consider him for commander-in-chief. The question is, if he doesn't do that, I told you, it's a pick 'em race. Either of these people can win.
Now, one of the things that was, just before I get off the poll thing, the one poll that made me just laugh out loud was the one that showed Texas. And it was almost one of those. It was a Washington Post. They did all 50 states. Yeah. And the poll showed that Mrs. Clinton was actually ahead by a point. Now, obviously, anybody who looks at these things, you say, okay, well, that's interesting, but there's no way that that is an accurate poll, correct?
No, you really have to take polls like that with a grain of salt at this point. That's a Survey Monkey campaign where they're essentially just grabbing all the information they can off the internet. Anybody who responds to any Survey Monkey poll, and then as Gary mentioned, they're trying to weight it based on what they think the electorate's going to look like in November. I would just pretty much throw that in the trash. Although I think one point it does make is that, and this other polls are showing this too, so in this case it does have some merit, is that Donald Trump is unlikely to win in double digits, like say Mitt Romney in 2012 or in 2012, or John McCain in 2008. And therefore, that could have a negative impact on some down-ballot candidates. So while Donald Trump doesn't have to be worried about winning Texas, some down-ballot Republicans have to be worried about a small Democratic wave that could grow larger, sweeping them out.
You keep your pulse on the conservative pulse of not only the state, but the country in many ways. Once upon a time, there were swing states that were pretty much, you always knew, swing states. Seems to me like the, quote, swing states that we've been used to in the past aren't necessarily the same ones this time around.
I think you're right. I think that there are states in play that in the past were not in play, and I think it's the nature of who the nominees are. I mean, Mark and I were talking before. Think about this for the Democrats. If they had nominated somebody like Joe Biden, who everybody likes, Republicans or Democrats, it's not on policy, they like him, they get along, they were able to work with him when he was in the Senate, they advanced issues that were good for the country, he'd be up 15 points now, and the race would be essentially over. However, the Democrats decided to pick a badly flawed candidate. And for that matter, so do the Republicans. So we have an instance where, who do the American people dislike more? Well, this week it's Hillary Clinton. Next week it could be Donald Trump. The two most unpopular candidates for president in modern era. It's unbelievable.
What do you talk to your students and people who are in your, what do you talk to them about in terms of the uniqueness of this race because of the unfavorables that are involved in both candidates?
Well, I think one thing it reflects is that our primary system, the way we nominate our presidential candidates, is deeply flawed. That primary system allowed us to get two candidates who are viewed unfavorably by a majority of Americans. 60% of Americans view Donald Trump unfavorably, 55% view Hillary Clinton unfavorably. That's the most since at least Goldwater back in 1964. And that's a real problem. As a result, you're going to have many voters going to the polls, and they're going to be choosing between two flavors of poison. That is, they don't like either of them. They believe that both would be really bad for the country, but in the end, they're going to have to choose one or the other, or not vote or cast a protest vote for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein.
Two flavors of poison. I'm going to use that again at some point in time. You mentioned that, and that's, I've heard the spin being sometimes, well, Hillary Clinton may be a flawed candidate. Donald Trump is a dangerous candidate. Right. That's one of the spins. Right. Is that one of the things that people are going to have to try to put in their minds when they go vote? Which one of the, you said, there's pick your poison, basically.
Well, I agree with Mark, but I think that Hillary Clinton is a criminal, essentially. That's my opinion. And the American people have concerns about that. My big test is my 89-year-old mother, who is a nominal Democrat, who last week at dinner told me she cannot vote for Hillary Clinton. She's just had it with all of her garbage and lies. She's had it. So that's kind of a reflection, I think, see happening, that she will not get some of these
What else did she say
Democratic
after that?
voters.
She said, I can't vote for Hillary and I will vote for Trump?
She said she's going to vote for Trump as the lesser of two evils.
Oh, okay. Well, I know we need about an hour. We don't have an hour.
No,
we do have another segment, though.
That's good to know.
We're going to talk about the down ballot impacts and what it may mean to our local races. That's next. When Houston Newsmakers continues, guess which one of the races we're going to focus on first?